as we talk about a healing conference, a coming back together, I think the title itself suggests that there is a way back, that there is something to put back together, that there is common ground to be found, and there is an essential human component that is good as opposed to bad. And so in our organization, Deputy Mayor Judy Reese-Morris, Judy, where are you? Please stand up. I want you to meet this fantastic lady. Judy is the Deputy Mayor and Chief of Staff of the City of New Orleans, and for the most part, although she'd be humble about it, runs the city. And has done an incredible job in guiding me and working with me as we have worked with the Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation to talk about ways that we can get to the greatest that we need to be. And so somebody asked me today, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, what happened about this post-racial America? And I said, anybody who thinks that we're in a post-racial America is either delusional or wrong or doesn't really walk the walk that many people make. And so let me say just a couple of things to you as I welcome you to the city of New Orleans. First of all, we always begin with thanks. Thank you so much for everything that you have done for us individually as American citizens, and then part of this network of healing that you have become a part of. Thank you for the Kellogg Foundation, for the work that you have done, and thank you for coming to the city of New Orleans to help us help ourselves. This particular building that you're in, by the way, sir, how are you? Never fired one employee. You know how hard that is? After Katrina, the Marriott company never fired one employee. When this building was shut down, when it was underwater, and it was for a long time when it was dark, when they couldn't get electricity to it, they took care of everybody. And this is a very special place for those of us who remember very, very well what we went through. Louisiana, as you know, has been at the center of civil rights struggles since the beginning of our time. Many of you may remember, although you didn't know him personally, PBS Pinchback, who was actually the governor of the state in 1872. He was the first non-white governor in the United States of America. Ironically, he was the governor of the state of Louisiana. You can believe that. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, kind of got started right down the street, not far from here. If you go to the river, go down a couple of blocks. They met, right in the Bywater. Ruby Bridges, who is a dear friend of mine today, continues to grace us with her presence, and so many others. We have worked really, really hard to try to show people through action that the city of New Orleans is important to the world, because we represent a way, we represent a view, we represent a coming together when we are walking amongst the angels that are with us as opposed to the devils that are with us. And that kind of culinary term, gumbo, when turned on its spiritual sides, means that, a lot of us come from a lot of different places, and we ended up in the same place, and we love each other hard. And, there is beauty in essence, in authenticity. And then when we talk about coming together, we're not talking about putting white and gray together. We're talking about a mosaic that is deep and rich, that celebrates everybody's uniqueness, and that is woven together intricately. And that looks a lot more beautiful than other people's ideas of diversity, which could be a whole bunch of people in the same room together, but nobody talking to each other. So ours is different. And we relish in that, but we struggle with it, like everybody else does. And so I could give you a long list of why New Orleans is doing better than it was 2 years ago, and in many ways we are. I could give you a long story about how the city of New Orleans is becoming amazingly a great story of resurrection and redemption and resilience, and it is, but that's really not what's important. I want to ask you permission to talk to you about something that's really hard, but I'm looking out there and I'm seeing a room of warriors, so I guess you can take it. So why don't we just get at it for a minute, and let me ask you just a question. If you could just raise your hand. How many people in here know who Trayvon Martin is? That's really good. Does anybody in here not know? who Trayvon Martin is? All right. Does anybody in here know who Joseph Elliott is? How about Ricky Summers? How about Nolan Stansberry? How about Jeremy Doty? How about Rodney Ruffin? Nobody knows them, right? Well, let's talk about that just for a minute. Racism is this nation's original sin. No question about it. We're still not finished with that. We're still working our way through it. Injustice and racism, both fruit of the tree of hatred, manifest themselves all over the world, but poignantly on the streets of America every day. And it is something that we all have to, number one, acknowledge. Number two, take ownership of. Number three, you don't have to be at fault for it, but you have to accept responsibility for fixing it. And number four, you have to find a way. And as I have said many times, you can't go around it. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You got to go through it. And we can't be afraid to talk about it. So I saw Ron Chisholm in the back, one of our great leaders that has helped us have that discussion. So, and you want to... So the question has been asked, and everybody has opined about the tragic loss of Trayvon Martin and why it happened and why we talk so much about it, what it was really about. And it's a very important discussion to have. Where there's injustice, it needs to be fixed. Where there's racism, it needs to be cured. These are issues of the day which call our attention on a continuous basis that we cannot lose sight of, because peace is not a fait accompli. It does not come by accident. It comes by purpose, and it comes by hard work. And it is fleeting, meaning that it will leave you like a butterfly if you let it go. It will fly away from you. And so it will always be our life's work. And when you have laws that are applied unfairly or not evenly, where similarly situated people are treated differently, you find injustice. There may be many reasons for that, but that is where the injustice lies. And all of us should understand what the pain and the sting of injustice will bring us. And so, at least from where I sit, very, very broadly, very, very generally, not meant to be comprehensive at all, besides the tragic loss of an individual's life whose name was Trayvon Martin, we should say that his life was important, and that the injustice of not treating everybody the same way is not just as important to his family, but it is important to America as well, and we'll be a better country when we learn how to treat everybody equally. And that is important, and it is something that we have to work towards. And I'm not going to continue this sentence with a but. I'm going to continue this sentence with, in conjunction therewith. In conjunction therewith, there are other things that are happening in America that we could be aware of if we looked at it. And so I want to help you look at it. Working on my balance. Now, I'm not that old. I know I look old, but I'm only 19. Since 1979, which is as far back as the piece of papers will take us, in the city of New Orleans, 243 people, by average, although you shouldn't average lives, have been killed on the streets of New Orleans. Some years it was a little bit higher, some years it was a little bit lower. But every day on the streets of New Orleans, I'm just talking about my city because I don't want to talk about other mayor cities, people are killed tragically, gunned down, left to lay in cold pools of blood on hard streets. 243 every year since 1979. Now, there's somebody who's a better mathematician than me, but if you add that up, that's a lot. In America last year, 15,000 people or so were killed on the streets of America, violently, and left alone by themselves. And nobody knows their names. like we know Trayvon's. Mayor Michael Nutter and I have decided to talk about this in a group called Cities United. And these are the important messages. First of all, the lives of young black men are really important. They're sacred, and they need to be protected. Their lives are worth fighting for, and so we have to figure out who we have to fight in order to save their lives. So statistics can be manipulated sometimes, but if you look at them clearly, they don't lie. So let me just run the numbers for you. About 7,000 young African-American men were killed on the streets of America last year alone. Last year alone. 90% of the victims are young African-American males. Most of the perpetrators are young African-American males. They're mostly between 16 and 25. And here's the saddest of the entire story. 88% of them know each other. They're being slaughtered on the streets of America every year. More people have been killed on the streets of America by far than soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. We spent $1 trillion prosecuting those wars. I don't know how much money we spend saving young African-American men. And in almost 100% of the cases, they used a gun. Now, those are the facts. There was no parade for Ricky Summers. There was no press conference for Ricky Summers. Nobody showed up other than his friends and his family and his teachers and the folks for him. There was a young man who was killed and left in a backyard by some of his friends, and nobody knows his name either. And it happens every day across America, and nobody says anything about it. Either because we don't understand or we don't know, other because we're too confused or we're scared, and we don't understand how to deal with it. Now, I realize that I'm a white man standing in front of an audience. That's a little different. So I'm going to tell you what an African-American man said. If the Ku Klux Klan killed 6,000 black kids on the streets of America, they would be held to pay. The world would stop moving. The sun would stop shining. And we would find a way to fix the problem. And so when we talk about racial healing, when we talk about trying to find a way, my question is, what is it that we get upset about? Is it the injustice of a circumstance that makes us stand up and rise? Or is it the loss of life? It's a question worth asking because the answer is really not clear, at least to me. It may be clear to you. For those of us that remember Gina, where a number of young men were involved with another young man, and then a prosecutor mischarged. The world got upset about that injustice of treating similarly situated individuals differently. When Trayvon was tragically taken for us, we got upset about the injustice of not treating Mr. Zimmerman the way we thought somebody else would be treated in that circumstance. But were we upset about the injustice? Or were we upset about the loss of Trayvon's life? And which one is more important? Which one causes us to rise up? We should ask ourselves that question. It does not necessarily mean that one has to be more important than the other. But they're the same fruit of the poisonous tree, or as some of us have come to learn in the South, strange fruit. Amen? And so, my plea, my question, my inquiry, my hope, my quest, my painful yell is, if their lives are important, why don't we do more? So in 1996, Mother's Day, Susan, Mother's Day, James Darby, 8 years old, goes to A.L. Davis Playground with his mom. And they get into a little football game, like those of us that grew up on the street got into. And Joseph Norfleet and his brother Michael and their little sister were kind of hanging in the area. And James kind of ran into the little sister by accident. James and Michael got in a little fight. The little sister got upset. She ran home to her brother Joseph, who was right down the street. unbeknownst to everybody, this little 13-year-old girl was pregnant. Joseph, who had been drinking, who was 19, was in the house with his mother's boyfriend, who had just come back from Angola. And he said to him, you can't let anybody disrespect you like that. You got to go back and get some of that. So Joseph puts Michael in the car with him, and they go back to A.L. Davis Playground, and everybody's finished. We finished with our crawfish, the game's over. We're walking back down the street, and Joseph puts a gun outside of the window, a shotgun, and he shoots, and he kills James Garvey, 8 years old. A little boy who had just a couple of weeks before written to President Clinton, who got the letter later after the boy had died and said, I'm afraid in my neighborhood. James is dead. Today, Joseph is 36. He's in Angola. He's been there 19 years. Cost everybody a lot of money. Lost his life, lost his future, lost his progeny, and James is dead. Two awful, tragic circumstances to the one that died and to the one that lived. And that story repeats itself across your country, the greatest country that the world has ever seen, every day of our lives, every day. And nobody says anything about it. There are no marches about that. White cop kills a black kid, you got to march. Black cop kills a white kid, you got to march. The injustice of it makes us stand up because we have all been tainted in some form or fashion, and that we're connected to that. But we cannot connect ourselves to the most devastating thing that's happening in the United States of America today. It is unnatural that so many young lives are being taken on the streets of America. It is unnatural, and it does not have to be this way. We can change things, right? We should continue to focus our attention, as all of you have so eloquently done, by singing from your soul about the pain of injustice and the need to create a more perfect union by finding a way to heal ourselves as a nation, because we are one people. Indivisible, supposedly. Indivisible. That's a very important word. Indivisible. That means intricately woven in every molecule, not pushed together, but individually woven. We can find a more perfect union, but you cannot, as a civilized society, justifiably argue that you are a great community when that many important things are being taken from you every day like they do not matter. And you cannot have the arrogance of attitude to think that because you march one day about justice, that somehow you believe in that if you won't show up and talk about that issue as well, because it's too hard, or somebody might talk bad about you, or we can't figure it out. We have to fix this problem. We have to stop here and fix this problem before we go to someplace else. And Mayor Nutter and I and a lot of other people want to call this nation to purpose on this issue, that's saving young African-American men who don't look like Trayvon Martin, who really may look scary, who really may have bad things in their past, who really may be hard to try to grab back, who some people in this room would walk across the street from late at night because you're nervous too. I'm talking about the toughest of the tough. You know, their lives are important as well. And if we can't find a way to get there, then we can't find peace. And if you can't have peace, you can't have freedom. And if you can't be free, there is no liberty. And then what are we all fighting for? So, I come tonight, supposedly in a lighthearted way to welcome you. Sorry. I want to throw this at you because I want you to think about it. You can tell me a couple things. You can say, shut the hell up. You could say, well, who are you to tell us? You could say, look, I hear you, but that's not my kid. You know, we want to be part of the great civil rights movement of our time. We want to, you know, sing. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around. We want to sing. We want to march. We want to get mad because the police department's bad. It is. We got to fix it. You could say, why are you talking about this? You should talk about other stuff. You can talk about all that stuff. And if you do, that's fine. You get a pass because nobody's going to blame you. But don't try to tell me that you think life is important if you don't want to look at James Darby for me. James Darby is waiting on us, and nobody's coming. James Darby got left behind, and nobody had a press conference about that. And so did all these other young men who were on their way to college, some of them, and got shot in the back. So people ask me, and I'll end with this, how do you like being mayor? It's a great job. It really is. You like politics, you like governing, you like emergency room physicians in a war zone, it's a good job. That's what being a mayor is like. And there's some glorious things about it, and there's some painful things about it. But the hardest thing for me every day is 199 people lost their lives on the streets of the city. 60, although our murder rate's down 18%, right? One's too many. But they're not statistics. In a very personal way. When my BlackBerry goes off, you get the bzzz, right? It says, dear Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to inform you that last night gunshots were fired. We arrived at the scene. We saw a young African-American male lying on the ground, bullet hole to the back of the head, dead on arrival. There are no witnesses. Now think about that. There are no witnesses. That is a condemnation. That is a condemnation. Right? Please, Lord, forgive me for what I say and what I don't say. That is an act, no, but it is an omission. There are no witnesses. And that is the statement about what it is that we're doing in America, because we are failing to witness what we all know is true, and what we all know is there, as though somehow, without us doing anything about it, it's going to get fixed. And so my grandmother told me a little story about how someone knocks you off the chair, that's on them, and you can spend a whole lot of time crying about it, but if I come back next week and you're behind still on the ground, that's on you.
Somebody keep moving that chair.
Y'all got a grandma? Y'all grandma never told y'all that? That's what my grandma said. And you know it's true. You know it's true. Everybody in this room knows that what I'm telling you is true. And yet we don't do anything about it. And silence is the great killer. Silence is the great killer. You would never leave your child behind. And everybody else's child in this country, in one way or the other, belongs to us because we're all part of the same thing. And so how do we justify not talking about this issue? I promise you it's fraught with difficulty. It's fraught with agony. There will be a lot of things that go back and forth about why and therefore and what if and don't you think and what if we could have and why you and not us and I don't need to but I don't have time. But at the end of the day, the fact still remains that in the United States of America, more people are being killed on the streets right now than if you go to war and try to protect the freedom of your country. And it all revolves around a very simple notion that we somehow think that the lives of young African-American men are expendable. And they are not. Not even on their worst day. They are not. So, I just end with this, before y'all kick me off the stage. New Orleans has a very special place in the nation's soul. You saved us. You helped us stand back up. And it is incumbent upon us to not look away from the lessons that we see on the streets every day and ask America the tough questions. And we are going to ask this question. And we will stand up and testify to what has to be so that America can find herself again and become that more perfect union that we all know and dream of. Thank you very much, and God bless you.